The law office of Hollingsworth and Wade smelled like a mix of old leather, fresh mahogany, and the kind of cologne rich people spray when they want to pretend they've never lied in their life. I sat quietly in the far corner of the waiting room, legs crossed, phone in hand. Though I wasn't reading anything, I was watching, listening, breathing through the thick tension that had been building for weeks. Across from me sat Valerie Moore, my father's second wife, designer sunglasses perched on her head like a crown. She looked effortlessly smug in her cream silk blouse and high heels that cost more than my rent. Her two children from her previous marriage, Jackson and Brielle, flanked her like loyal hyenas. "I'm getting the Aston Martin," Jackson declared, scrolling through photos on his phone like he'd already signed the title. Brielle giggled, twirling a platinum blonde strand of hair. "Daddy said the beach house in Malibu was mine. I'm turning the guest wing into a wellness spa." Valerie gave them both a little pat, her nails glinting with fresh polish. Now, let's wait until things are official," she cooed, but her tone dripped with certainty, like this was just a formality. She glanced over at me, lips twitching into a cold smile. "I still don't know why you bothered coming, Savannah. Thomas made his wishes very clear. Thomas, not Dad, not my late husband, just Thomas." I didn't answer, just smiled and looked back down at my phone. I wasn't here to fight, I wasn't here to beg. I was here because my father told me to be. Just then, the receptionist stepped into the hallway. "Mr. Wade will see you now." The four of us filed into the large conference room. It was exactly what you'd expect. High ceilings, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, the faint scent of cigars someone pretended not to smoke. At the head of the long table sat Elliot Wade, my father's longtime attorney, with a thick leather folder open in front of him. His expression was polite, controlled, but I caught something glimmering at the edge of his eyes. A flicker of amusement? "Please, everyone, take a seat," he said smoothly. "This may take a little time. Coffee? Water?" Valerie waved him off. "Let's just get to it. I have a meeting with my financial advisor at 4. "Of course you do," I thought. Elliot cleared his throat. "First, let me extend my condolences. Thomas Moore was not just a client, but a friend of mine for over 20 years. "Yes, very touching," Valerie interrupted. "Let's talk about the will." He paused, then opened the folder. Jackson leaned forward, hands tented like he was about to receive the Holy Grail. Brielle popped a piece of gum in her mouth. Valerie folded her arms like a queen awaiting her crown. I stayed quiet. I already knew what was in that folder, because I had been in this room before, 14 months ago, when my father was still alive, when Valerie was off on her wellness retreat in Sedona, when he leaned over and whispered, "Let them think they've won, just for a little while." Valerie adjusted her seat like she was settling onto a throne. Her heels clicked against the marble floor as she crossed her legs, poised and perfect, just like always. Jackson leaned back, arms stretched behind his head, like he owned the place already. Brielle took out her phone and opened her front camera, checking her lip gloss. Elliot Wade's fingers rested lightly on the folder in front of him, still closed. "I have in my hands the last will and testament of Thomas Grayson Moore," he said calmly. "Dated, let me confirm, signed and notarized exactly 6 years ago." "6 years?" I asked softly, my voice barely cut through the polished air of the room. Valerie's laugh was sharp, like glass cracking. "Oh, sweetheart," she said, not even bothering to look at me. "You clearly don't understand how these things work. Thomas and I updated everything after we got married. You were busy saving puppies or planting trees or whatever it is you do now." I didn't flinch. I'd heard it all before. "She barely even visited," Valerie continued, eyes still fixed ahead. "Too busy running that little nonprofit in Austin to spend time with her father." Elliot said nothing, just waited. "Shall we proceed?" he asked finally. "Yes," Valerie said, her voice slicing the air. "Let's. I believe you'll find it's all quite straightforward." She looked at me then, eyes full of fake pity and real satisfaction. He left everything to the family who was actually there for him. Jackson smirked. Brielle was already Googling pool designers. Elliot finally opened the folder. "For the record," he began, "this is the official will on file. According to this document, the estate is to be divided between Mrs. Valerie Moore and her children, Jackson and Brielle Whitmore. A small contribution is to be made to an animal rescue fund in Savannah's name." He paused. "And that's it," Valerie announced triumphantly. "See? Just like I told you." I looked around the table. No one said anything. Not Jackson, not Brielle, not even Elliot. Until... He smiled. Not a big one. Just the kind of smile someone makes when they know a secret. The kind of smile my dad used to make when he beat me at chess and said, "Checkmate in 2 moves." "Mrs. Moore," Elliot said smoothly, "do you know what a revocable trust is?" Valerie blinked. "Of course. It's just a financial structure. Thomas and I handled all that after the wedding." "Ah," Elliot nodded. And do you know when Thomas set up the Grayson Trust? That name, I saw the flicker in her eyes. He didn't have a trust before the marriage, Valerie said quickly. Everything was under the estate. Elliot slid a second, thicker folder onto the table. Actually, he created it 23 years ago, when Savannah was 10. The room dropped into silence so fast it felt like we were underwater. Valerie's expression cracked, just for a second. Brielle paused mid-scroll. Jackson sat forward, for once not saying a word. And the trust? I asked, even though I already knew. Elliot looked at me, then back at them. Was structured to transfer everything, property, accounts, assets, either on the date of Thomas's death or Savannah's 33rd birthday, whichever came first. Valerie's hand gripped the armrest. That's impossible. It's legally binding, Elliot replied, voice still calm, and fully executed. He turned to me. Savannah, when was your birthday? I answered gently. 13 months ago. Dad came to my apartment that weekend, brought me pecan pie. Valerie was in Tulum. Ah, yes, Elliot said, like he was recalling the weather. That was the same weekend Thomas came to my office. He signed the final amendment to the trust that Friday. Valerie's mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. But no words came, because she knew. This wasn't a twist. It was a trap. And she'd walked right into it wearing designer heels and a smile. The silence in the room stretched, long and taut, like a rope just before it snaps. Valerie's fingers tapped once on the table, then stopped. Jackson leaned forward, his voice cracking just a little. You're saying the beach house, the Range Rover, the condo in Miami, all held under the Grayson Trust, Elliot replied smoothly, flipping a tab in the thick folder, which, as of 13 months ago, transferred in full to Savannah Moore. Brielle gasped, then actually laughed. Wait, so you're saying I've been living in her Malibu house? Elliot didn't answer. He didn't need to. I did. Yes, I said quietly. You've been living in my house, using my pool, posting TikToks from my kitchen. Valerie finally found her voice. This is absurd. That house was in our name. I saw the paperwork. You saw what your husband let you see, Elliot said, sharper now. Thomas was very intentional about where each document lived. The trust was sealed, active, and invisible to anyone not named in it. Jackson turned to his mother. Wait, does that mean... I knew what he was about to ask. The bank accounts too, he said, voice thin. The platinum card? My lease? Elliot nodded solemnly. All connected to the trust. All transitioned quietly last year. Everything you've been spending has technically belonged to Savannah. I watched their faces crumble in real time. 3 people who had laughed in my face. Who made me feel like an outsider at every dinner, every holiday, every phone call I was never invited to. They'd been living like royalty, on my inheritance. And I had let them, because Dad asked me to. Let it play out, he'd said that night on my birthday. They'll show you who they really are, if you give them enough rope. He was right, as usual. Brielle suddenly stood up, mascara already smudging. This can't be legal. I mean, this has to be fraud. Or manipulation. He was sick. Elliot raised an eyebrow. On the contrary, Thomas underwent a full cognitive evaluation before making any trust amendments. I have letters from 3 separate psychiatrists. He scored perfectly on all of them. He turned to Valerie. In fact, he insisted on the evaluations, said he needed documentation in case anyone tried to claim he was compromised. Valerie didn't speak. She stared at the grain of the wood on the table like it might offer her a way out. I leaned forward then, voice still soft but steady. You knew something was off, didn't you, Valerie? When he stopped asking for your help with his meds, when he started locking his office, when the gardener showed up twice a week but only ever worked in the backyard? Her eyes flicked up wide now. Yeah, I said, that wasn't a gardener, that was a former FBI agent. Dad hired him 2 years ago. Elliot pulled out a second file, photographs, time-stamped logs, phone transcripts. Thomas had suspicions about your spending, the travel accounts, the changes to his medication schedule. Jackson stood up. Okay, now this is going too far. Elliot raised a calm hand. Sit down, Jackson, there's more. And there was. Because when Dad planned something, he didn't do it halfway. He didn't just move assets into a trust. He built a fortress. And inside it, he hid everything he valued, including me. Elliot opened the second folder with deliberate care, like a magician revealing the final card in a rigged game. This, he said, sliding a sealed envelope across the table toward me, was left by Thomas with explicit instructions. I recognized the handwriting instantly. Strong, neat, just a little slanted, like Dad's voice when he was serious but still trying to be kind. He asked that you read it aloud, Savannah, Elliot said. Valerie shifted in her chair. Jackson muttered something under his breath. Brielle started to cry again, but I didn't hesitate. I broke the seal and unfolded the letter. My father's words stared up at me, firm and full of clarity. My dearest Savannah, if you're reading this, then our plan worked. I'm sorry for the secrecy, but I had to know who they truly were. I needed to protect you while I found out. I paused, and for a moment the room disappeared. I was back on the porch with him, his hand on mine, his voice quiet as dusk. You were right to be suspicious. When I remarried so quickly after your mother passed, it was because I thought I couldn't face the grief alone. What I didn't realize was that I had invited a predator into our lives. Valerie inhaled sharply. I kept reading. At first, she played the role perfectly, nurturing, supportive. But you saw through it long before I did, and I thank you for that, for standing back, for watching, for not giving her what she wanted, a fight she could win. My hands trembled slightly. While she thought she was isolating you from me, we were moving the real estate, the stocks, the accounts. Every asset you now own, Savannah, was a piece of our strategy. You let them believe they were winning. You were brave, patient, stronger than I ever taught you to be. To Valerie, Jackson, and Brielle, I know what you are. The reports are with the district attorney. If you're reading this, you may want to consider how you spend the next 30 days, because they may be the last you spend in freedom. Valerie stood up halfway. This is a trap, she spat. A joke. None of this will hold up. Elliot remained seated, calm as ever. Actually, it already has. The trust is irrevocable. The investigations are real. And Savannah, he turned to me. You filed the eviction notices this morning? I nodded, reached into my leather bag, and laid down 3 envelopes. One for each of you, I said. You have 30 days to vacate my homes, all of them. You can't evict me, Valerie shouted, rising fully now. I was his wife. You are his tenant, I corrected, rent-free, but not anymore. I turned to Jackson. That downtown apartment? Gone. To Brielle. The Malibu house? Mine again. I looked back at Valerie. The estate you remodeled and posed in for all those lifestyle shoots? My property, my land, my name? You planned this, she whispered, voice almost inaudible. I met her gaze. No, he did. I just followed his lead. She stared at me like she was seeing me for the first time. Not the quiet daughter, not the girl who never showed up, but the woman who outweighed her, the woman who inherited everything. Valerie hadn't sat back down. She hovered beside the chair like she couldn't decide whether to faint or throw it across the room. Jackson was frozen, fists clenched, eyes darting between me and Elliot like he was waiting for someone to say, "Just kidding." And Brielle, poor Brielle, was too stunned to speak, her mouth still half open from the last scream she never finished. Elliot waited. Let the silence breathe. Then, in his most formal tone, he cleared his throat and said, Now for the final portion of Thomas More's official last will and testament. He reached into the original folder, pulled out a small slip of paper. It was almost comically short. To my wife, Valerie Ann Moore, I leave the sum of $1. He placed a crisp $1 bill on the center of the table. Jackson's head jerked toward it like it might bite him. To her children, Jackson Reed Whitmore and Brielle Elise Whitmore, I also leave the sum of $1 each. He pulled out 2 more bills, laid them down gently beside the first. That was it. $3. Not a penny more. Even the air in the room felt offended. Brielle choked out a whisper. $1? Technically, I said, reaching into my bag again. You now have 4 because I brought these 2. I pulled out 3 more envelopes, each one thick with legal ink. Eviction notices. Filed this morning. You have 30 days to vacate my properties, before court enforcement begins. Valerie finally snapped. You can't do this. I was his wife. I shared his bed. You shared his fortune, I said, voice cool, but never his faith. You ungrateful little... she started, but Elliot cut her off. Mrs. Moore, he said sharply, you are now subject to the terms of the eviction. Any attempt to delay or retaliate will be seen as grounds for legal escalation. Valerie's face flushed red, then pale, then almost green. Jackson lunged forward, voice full of desperation now. Okay, look, maybe we went too far, but you don't have to ruin our lives. You have millions. You don't need all of it. I tilted my head. You're right, I said. I don't need all of it, but I earned it, by waiting, by trusting him, and by never once stealing from the man who raised me. I looked at each of them, Valerie still trembling, holding her handbag like a shield. Jackson, sweat starting to bead on his forehead. Brielle, completely lost in the math of consequences. Dad gave you exactly what you deserved, I said. $1 for each lie, $1 for each manipulation, $1 for each time you tried to erase me. Valerie opened her mouth again, but Elliot cut in one last time. There's one final document, he said, placing it gently on the table. A restraining order, effective immediately. All 3 of you are legally barred from contacting Savannah Moore in any form. If violated, full enforcement measures will be taken. Valerie stared at it like it might explode. You set this up, she whispered, more to herself than anyone else. You planned all of this. No, I said, rising to my feet. He planned it. I gathered my papers, picked up my father's letter, left the 3 $1 bills exactly where they lay. And you know what? I added, pausing at the door. He was generous, because if it were up to me, I wouldn't have given you even that much. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise. No courtrooms, no lawyers, no envelopes. Just me, a coffee mug, and the quiet hum of knowing it was over. I got in my truck and drove the familiar 2 hours to Westwood Hills Cemetery. My father had picked the spot himself, said it overlooked just enough trees to feel like home, but was still close enough to town for visits. The sun was just starting to stretch across the horizon as I pulled in. I parked in the gravel lot and walked the rest of the way, past rows of marble, fresh flowers, and silence. So much silence. But not the kind that hurts. The kind that holds you. Dad's headstone was simple, gray, polished, strong, just like him. Thomas Grayson Moore, 1952-2024. Builder, believer, father. I placed a single stem of coral chrysanthemum at the base, his favorite. Mom used to grow them every spring in the garden behind our old house. He used to say they smelled like courage. "Hey, Dad," I whispered, kneeling beside the stone. "We did it." I stayed there for a while, long enough for the wind to shift, long enough to remember how his laugh sounded when he beat me at Scrabble, long enough to forget, for just a moment, that I had ever doubted he saw me. When I finally stood up, I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the second envelope, the one I hadn't opened yesterday. On the front, in his handwriting, "For after it's done." Inside was a photo, the two of us, taken 14 months ago. I had forgotten someone snapped it. We were standing on the back porch of the little house in Austin, him holding up 2 fingers like a peace sign, me laughing so hard I was halfway turned away. In the corner, you could see the edge of a manila folder. The trust paperwork. That same weekend. On the back of the photo, he'd written, "Smart always beats clever. You're the smart one, kiddo." I held the photo to my chest for a minute, let myself feel everything at once. The betrayal, the justice, the sorrow, the love. Then I whispered, "Thank you." Not just for the money, not even for the plan, but for believing I was worth protecting, even when I had started to wonder if I really was. As I walked back to the truck, I passed a small garden plot the cemetery kept for visitors. Lavender, rosemary, coral mums. Someone had added a little wooden sign. It read, "The things we plant in love grow stronger than anything rooted in greed." I don't know who put it there, but I took it as a sign. Some truths don't need lawyers. Some legacies don't need vaults. They just need to be planted deep enough to survive the storm. And mine was. Thanks to him, I didn't go back to the estate. Let them pack their things. Let them scream into silk pillows and count the days left on their eviction notices. I had somewhere else to be. I drove south, the highway open and quiet. The landscape changed slowly from cityscape to open fields and dry stone fences. After about an hour and a half, I turned off onto a narrow country road where the trees arched overhead like an old memory. And then there it was, the little house with the green shutters. It sat on 3 acres of wild Texas land just outside Austin. One wraparound porch, a wind chime by the front door, and an oak tree big enough to hold every secret my dad and I had ever whispered beneath it. Most people didn't even know it existed. That was the point. Dad had bought it in secret 3 years ago, after Valerie started asking too many questions about downsizing and liquidating unnecessary property. He put it under my name without saying a word. Then one weekend he drove me here. Told me, "This is where I want you to be when it all comes down. Let them think you're struggling. Let them underestimate you. You'll be safer in the quiet." And he was right. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside. It smelled like cedar and lavender, just as we left it. My books still on the shelf, his mug still hanging in the kitchen, the lemon tree on the windowsill leaning toward the light. I made tea, sat on the old porch swing, watched the wind ripple through the tall grass like it had nothing to prove. This house didn't have marble floors, no imported tile, no $1,000,000 view, but it was mine. Really mine. Not held in a trust. Not filtered through lawyers. Not dependent on inheritance or signatures. This was where my father saw the real me, and gave me room to grow. I reached into my bag and pulled out one last envelope, the deed, signed and stamped, the ink still sharp. His handwriting on the edge. "In case she forgets, she already owns everything that matters." I smiled. Not because I'd won, but because I'd survived, because I'd stayed patient, because I'd stayed honest, and because in the end, clever crumbles under pressure, but smart, steady, silent, that endures. I sat there until the sun slipped behind the trees, warm light catching on the porch rails like gold dust. Somewhere in the kitchen, the wind knocked over a wooden spoon. I laughed. It sounded like him. In life, sometimes you don't have to scream to be heard. You don't need to fight loud battles to reclaim what's yours. All it takes is patience, a clean heart, and doing the right thing. because time has a way of revealing everything. Savannah didn't seek revenge through rage, she simply waited. And when the truth came to light, it didn't just deliver justice, it restored the dignity that had been quietly stolen. If you've ever felt overlooked, underestimated, or used by the very people who were supposed to love you, remember this: you don't have to prove your worth through anger, you can prove it through grace. And when the moment is right, that quiet strength will echo louder than any scream. Thank you for staying with us until the end of this story. If you believe that kindness, integrity, and quiet resilience still matter in this world, leave a comment below. Share this story with someone who might need it today. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next twist, the next truth, the next sweet ending. Because sometimes, the sweetest revenge is living in peace, in the house you always knew was yours.